Thanks very much for inviting me. This is a really sort of interesting topic for me. So, we can try and make it 30 minutes, but if you want to make it 3 or 5 to 5 hours, I'm really happy to do that too. But maybe we'll do that down the bar afterwards. So when I spoke to Otto, he said, really want to put something together that sort of takes people on the journey right from the very beginning. So that sort of is where we sort of came up with the RPA Survival Guide. Or in other words, the why, what, how, who, where and when, which is quite a mouthful, I have to say, but we'll sort of try and sort of work through it. So we'll start with the why. And so why should you automate? And to be honest, there's a lot of organisations out there that haven't started on this journey yet. And there is actually a really, really simple answer. It really all boils down to, you want to avoid a near-death situation. Things are changing so rapidly. If you're not starting to think about this now, then actually you could find yourself in real trouble and unable to react quickly enough. We've all heard about the challenges, or maybe you haven't, but the companies like Blockbuster, which just disappeared overnight because of Netflix, Kodak, which disappeared because of the sort of advances in digital camera. These sorts of technologies are now moving organizations forward so rapidly, you need to start thinking about it. So the number one reason to start to consider whether automation is the right thing for you is survival. And it really does boil down to that. In financial services, where I do spend a lot of time, that is simply the whole point. Financial services have got a lot of people, they have to reserve a lot of capital, they have to reduce cost. And although it's something that they don't want to talk particularly about, they've got to get people and heads out of the organisation just simply to survive. It's not because they want to do it that way, it's because they have to do it that way. So survival is actually the sort of the first reason to be considering, why should I be doing this? Because you want to still be in existence in the next 5 years. But the second most important is probably the changing customer demands. That if you're not keeping up with customers and what they want and the 24/7 sort of operation, then actually you're not actually delivering what they need, and they will vote with their feet and they will just move on to the next person. So RPA and the automation tools will give you a platform to be able to deliver those customer demands. Cost and quality, in any sort of project that you do, always go hand in hand. So it won't come as a surprise that risk and compliance sort of fits in there. Even financial services sort of organisations and compliance organisations are realising that the robots can actually do a job consistently the same way. Humans actually really struggle to do that. And so actually the improving quality that you get by actually sort of automating these tasks actually is a real winner, and it reduces your organisational risk. But there's a last reason as well, which comes down to complexity. The jobs that we're expecting people to do are becoming increasingly complex. And actually this is where augmenting what people do is something that is also becoming increasingly popular, because people just can't hold all of that information in their heads at the same time. They need some sort of automated support to be able to help that. And we'll sort of look at that as well. So, in the UK, the chairman of the Bank of England made a similar statement to the one that we've got here. He said in the UK, 15 million jobs will be automated within the next 20 years. 15 million. You just can't quite imagine that number of people, or what's going to happen socially, economically, tax. And if you are interested, there is a lot of information now about the social implications of this. Some organisations, refer to this, rightly or wrongly, as the fourth industrial revolution, which all sounds a little bit grand, because it is. But the reason it's being called that is because of the social and political impact this is going to have. And it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's certainly going to happen before your children sort of get to their sort of careers. So actually we need to be starting to think about this. And there are a lot of people starting to sort of think about what is going to happen as more and more roles become automated. So onto the what. So when you talk to people, and you talk about robotic process automation, this is probably what they imagine. If they're not imagining this, they are imagining a real robot sitting there at a keyboard pressing keys. So actually, one of the things that we really need to talk to people about whenever we first get involved is to try and debunk some of those myths and actually help people understand, what automation really is. And there is a Robotic Process Automation Institute, which very kindly put together a definition. Now, it sort of goes blah, 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 blah. Now, if you're still awake before you've read all of that, you will realise it's technically accurate, but actually it doesn't really bring it to life. And so actually our job is to try and help to bring to life what is robotic process automation. And the first thing is to try and debunk the Terminator myth, which is that robots look like this. They're sitting on servers somewhere, hidden away in a big data center, running around, doing the jobs of humans. But actually, they're not very exciting. They don't look much like a Terminator. They don't look very much like a real robot. And that's the reality. There's pieces of software that are doing very rote tasks. The next thing that we need to help people with is a vocabulary. Because people read in the press so many different things about what automation is and what it's doing. The first starting point is to help to sort of tell people and explain to people what these things are. And often starting with the RPA Institute's definition isn't a great place to go, because they will have switched off before you've got past it's not a Terminator. So what we do is we give them these 5 definitions. And actually, arguably, the first definition that we give people isn't actually automation at all. We call it office automation just simply because there are lots of opportunities already within your organization to automate tasks without actually sort of investing in expensive pieces of additional software. Well, apparently I learned that my toaster now has more processing power than the Apollo mission. And when I grew up, actually, the Cray computer was the big, massive computer, and apparently the iPhone now surpasses the Cray computer, which is like, oh my God. By a large margin, yes. But yes, things move on. But we digress. But you do have lots of opportunities within your organization already. And actually, you've got to remember that the software that you use within your organization has been moving on as well. And quite often has been adding some of this functionality in as it goes. So one of the things to always do is always double check is definitely to, first of all, make sure that what you've got hasn't moved on in a way that you can utilize to automate tasks already. But also, I was talking to a gentleman earlier that there have been such advances in low-code operation and development that you can develop applications so rapidly that sometimes you can simply replace some of your legacy systems far more quickly than trying to put this veneer of automation over the top. So it's not, RPA isn't the be-all and end-all, or automation isn't the be-all and end-all of every situation. You've got to sort of look at your own circumstances and just, first of all, double-check, do you have other alternatives? Now, the truth is, of course, that in all likelihood, you do have some opportunities for automation. And actually, if you do have opportunities for automation, probably the place where lots of organizations start is what's called desktop automation. It's something that you can sit on your desktop, and while you're doing a job, you can almost outsource a bit of the job to somebody else. If it gets a bit complicated, or very sort of, or very rote in terms of the sort of sequence of tasks, you can go, I'll do this bit, and then an automation will kick in and do the next bit. And the most common example of this, and I'm sure most organizations have seen this, where you've got duplicate data entry. If you only had one system that you enter data into, that would be fantastic. But the reality is, there's several. And the very, very first pilot that I ran using RPA back in 2012, we were looking at a piece of new business coming in the door, an application form on paper, of course, coming through the door. And that data was entered manually into 7 different applications. duplicated across all those 7 applications. So the most simple example of desktop automation is the ability to simply help eliminate those tasks. So you key it once, and then the automation kicks in and keys it into all of the other applications. And it all happens at the desktop with the user sitting there. So the user will trigger it and it'll carry on. And there's lots of opportunities to be able to automate bits of tasks, really actually improve the speed with which these jobs are done. Because when an automation runs, not only does it run sort of there in front of the person, it runs much faster than the human would have done it. So you literally see it go fast forward through all those other tasks. It'll go as fast as whatever the underlying systems can run. Now, if you're running some really old, slow systems, they will still run really slow. But if you're using modern systems, and it's just duplication, it will run pretty damn quick on those desktops, and it will complete those tasks very, very, very quickly. That data entry example, we reduced the overall process time by over 50%. So it freed up 50% of their time to do other things. And back to the question of people, in that example, we were in a growth phase, so we were just eliminating all that challenge of recruitment, and we were redeploying into other areas. So it's a great opportunity to help people at the desktop. And there are lots of very, very similar desktop tasks. You see lots of organisation collating in information from different locations. When you're doing that, that's a very, very task-based, do it a bit at a time, from different sources. Automation's great. The next sort of step on the journey is robotic process automation, what we've been talking about here. Now, robotic process automation is the next step. It's literally taking the process all end to end and putting it into a black box. And so you just send it an instruction, update all these systems with this data, and it goes away and does it. You don't see it, it's just sort of sitting there doing that. And the reason that as we move from left to right on this chart is that it gets harder and harder as you move along, is that actually you need a whole process to be able to automate, to be able to sort of take it away and put it somewhere else. So it's often much simpler to actually do a bit at a time, and then when you've got it all, then you move it away, move it into a sort of back-end process. And so robotic process automation is doing exactly the same as desktop, except for it's just doing it in the background. It's still interacting with all your underlying systems. It's still doing what the person would have done, but it's eliminating all those very manual and rote tasks that they were doing, and leaving the thinking to them to do. So where you've got challenges, that's still where you want to sort of use a person. Next sort of step along the journey, and arguably virtual assistants sort of sits a little bit somewhere in the middle of these two. Virtual assistants you've probably sort of heard more and more about. These are the chat bots that you can sort of see out there. And lots of organisations now are becoming very interactive. And the reasons that they're doing this is largely because either text recognition or speech recognition, I mean, we've all seen Alexa and Siri and what can be done there, is becoming far, far easier to utilise. So that method of communication is getting far more common. So we've all sort of seen it. We've probably all used it on our iPhones or at home with Alexa. There's more and more opportunities to be able to move that way of working into the office as well. So either by chat or by voice, you can start to actually sort of interact and provide information. And at the very simplest end of that spectrum, you have what are called FAQ bots. They can understand your English and they can give you a sort of simple response. And it's almost like a sort of combination of just simply taking your question and providing you an answer that you would have typically found in an FAQ, but at the end of the day, you'd have had to have searched for it. And it's just doing it very interactively and using a very natural language. So it understands all the synonyms and different words that you can use to mean the same thing. They are, of course, getting far more complicated than that. And actually where virtual assistants are starting to get to now is they can actually start to actually understand what's called context. And context is that you begin a conversation and it's about your rail journey. And because it knows you're on a rail journey, it starts to know your station. And then if you're asking questions about destinations, it knows where you're going from and where you're going to. So it's understanding that context throughout the whole conversation and being able to put it all together. And actually that's now becoming far more advanced and actually starting to happen far more. And that probably is leading us to the last column here, which we've called cognitive / artificial intelligence / machine learning. The marketeers would love to call it artificial intelligence, but of course, we're a long way from the Terminator, But what we are really, really, really good at is understanding patterns. Being able to now understand things like voice, text, even, sort of the old forms that you used to get in that were handwritten. You can now use machine learning to begin to learn handwriting and pull out that data. You can start to feed it in all of the emails you received in a completely unstructured way and understand what it is that's being requested out of that email. And then once it understands what's being requested out of the email, you can sort of push it back into robotic process automation and process it through. And that machine learning element is starting to become more advanced and more common now. 2 weeks ago in Amsterdam, actually, there was a conference specifically on machine learning and AI. And it is amazing. The people who are pushing the boundaries of this are doing some incredible stuff. But what that's meaning is that the mainstream stuff is moving along really, really rapidly and becoming a tool that we are starting to see that is going to be used much more commonly. And I think I read in the news today, Google have decided that they are no longer a mobile-first organization, they're now an AI-first organization. And so things are changing, and that's because those disciplines are moving more quickly. But it's interesting, when you walk into a room with people for the very first time, and you talk about automation, their mind is over here on the right and not anywhere on the left. Sorry, yeah. So which way are we looking at this? Or anywhere near on the left. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to try and help to give them a vocabulary that brings it to life for your organization and actually sort of, lays it down in these ways and actually sort of says, you can start over here if you want to, but we've got lots and lots of opportunity over here. Let's crawl and walk and then perhaps, sprint later on. Undoubtedly you will get there, but do it one piece at a time. Yeah. So, on to the how. So, the first thing about sort of getting started is, we've just talked about an awful lot, and actually, the very, very first thing to do is start really small. Pick something and actually sort of just work it through with a very small team. If you've not done any of this before, it's a pretty safe thing to do, so just start small. The second thing to think about is to experiment. Because for your organization, you've got to try and match up all of these different tools that are out there, which is the one that is most suitable for you. So actually doing those small experiments will help you to learn. It'll help you to build some of that knowledge, and it will actually start to help you to have some data that will go, right, I can see now the differences between all of these tools. The other thing that is a sort of a big challenge is, on the journey that you're going on, that ultimately, as you scale up, you are going to get to a point where this is going to be a big deal for the organization. The question of people is going to hit really, really quickly. And because of all of the negative press, you have to sort of be prepared for that. And so actually sort of getting some leadership buy-in right at the very beginning is really important. That having been said, I have seen a lot of organizations that have done really well without that. And mind-boggling as it may sound, they had to do it that way because there was such a negative reaction from effectively the organization about doing it. So they did a small experiment in a small area to demonstrate the opportunity and then use that experiment to take it up to the board and then get buy-in and then take it on. So it's a bit of horses for courses. If you can start by getting leadership buy-in, it's much easier because you're going to start thinking about things really, really early. But not everybody has. We've talked about the common vocabulary. Really, the common vocabulary is just a way to debunk the myths and get everybody talking the same way. When I joined General Electric 15, 20 years ago, the first thing they did was put me on a course for Six Sigma, and they did that with everybody. And it was genius because actually, we all had that common vocabulary. So whoever I was talking to, whether I was talking to someone in aircraft engines or financial services, if I turned around and said, I've got a 3.8 Sigma process, they would know exactly what I meant by that, because they gave everybody that common vocabulary. And that's what you need to do when it comes to automation. Give everybody that common vocabulary so you can start to communicate with each other from the same point without any sort of misconceptions. The other thing we found, which probably in hindsight wasn't surprising, but was was surprising when we first found it, which was the number of people within the organisation that had some of the skills that were suitable for this. Oddly enough, when it came to robotic process automation, we found more people in business lines and in technology lines being able to grasp it and use it much more readily. Now, we'll talk about operating models at the end. So I'm not saying at the moment it's about, it belongs in the business or it belongs in IT, but actually the people in the business have a lot of skills that are out there. Leverage those skills, look for those skills, because one of the big challenges is actually having the right skills to be able to do this and where you get them from. You'll probably find you've got a lot of them in the business already. We talked about doing some experiments. Test and learn is a great term. 5 years ago, I was working for Liverpool Victoria, and we set up an innovation function. And we set that function up really with the goal to drive new technology change. We started with low-code development, we started with automation, and we started with agile, and we thought, this is great. This is, we all love our technology. This is exactly what we wanted to do. 6 months later, it was blindingly obvious it was nothing to do with the technology, and we were actually embarking on a cultural change. And actually, it was about cultural adoption that we needed to sort of spend our time and effort. The technologies, largely all work. And they work really well, surprisingly well. And actually, it's the buy-in that you get from the organisation, the confidence you need to give to the organisation, the skills and the culture you need to develop in the organisation that actually become the most important part. We knew that we were starting to make progress 2 years later, after we started. We knew we were beginning to make progress when the term test and learn was starting to be used generally in the organisation, because we'd been banging the drum about experiments and test and learn ever since we started. And it was like pushing water uphill. And then suddenly, as if someone had turned a switch, we suddenly found lots of people in the organisation saying, we're going to test and learn. And it was like, yes! Funny enough, that was also then the start of the second biggest problem we face, which is how do you then scale it? So I'll talk about operating models at the end. And the last thing is to start to build up a game plan. So the next slide. This is an example of a game plan. Nothing too specific, but it's just helping to sort of put together, where are we trying to get to? What have we got to do? What are the big ticket, what are the bold things that we need to do to get there? And it helps people to understand the journey that they're on. And the journey that you're going to be on really is that, sort of over here, sort of raising awareness is about that vocabulary. Understanding and increasing that common vocabulary is really important. Second most important thing, and we'll come back to this, is about identifying where do you start and which are the processes you need to look at. And then over time, you need to start thinking about how we're going to scale this up. How are we going to get the right skills, the right people, the right technology for this organisation? And actually, right down at the very end, a problem that organisations don't necessarily think of, which is the whole 24/7 operation. If organisations are currently a 9 to 5-ish organisation, as far as their customers are concerned, when you start adding automation, automation can run 24/7. And if you've never run a 24/7 operation, there's a lot of changes that can come in. So actually sort of constructing this plan, it doesn't have a lot of detail in it, because really what it's about is going, this is the journey we're going to go through, and just helps people to visualize where they're trying to get to. It's called a game plan, and it's, in my mind, if you've got roadmaps and technology roadmaps, it's a level higher than that sort of thing. It's just conceptually where you're trying to get to. So, who do you need to automate? So, there are lots of automation providers out there. So, I'm going to sort of give you a quick hand in terms of sort of categorizing a few of them. I've got four categories here. You've got over there in the corner, sort of the market leaders. Who are the people right now? And you can guess if you've read anything in the press who those guys are. But you've also got organisations over here which are called enterprise ready. These are organisations that are already big organisations. They actually have a lot of customers and a lot of technology. And they've also, not surprisingly, either been investing really heavily in RPA and automation tools, or they've been spending their money and buying automation companies to integrate into their offering. And that's, and they are big, sort of organizations. They have a lot of customers already, and they're actually now sort of mining their own customer base to actually implement RPA. You've then got sort of very targeted solutions, and for some industries, this is really important. Targeted solutions, for example, in finance, because you've got a very sort of specific finance organization, can be really useful. Finding a partner or a tool that speaks your language is sometimes more important than just having a generic solution. And then you've got contenders, and there's a long list of these. Right now, there's over 40 RPA providers, that are available. And probably because, it's been a full 2 or 3 days since I last looked, there's probably 42. It really is growing at a rapid rate. Not all of them are going to survive. Some of them are going to get bought. Some of them are going to sort of join up with others. So your contenders of that market, they're not necessarily a bad choice. In fact, they're definitely not a bad choice. But you've got to be aware they're not in the top tier. They have something to offer, and they may have more to offer to you. So they're worth actually sort of taking a look. So these are the sorts of organizations that fall into those categories. Probably Blue Prism, UiPath, and Automation Anywhere are the three that you hear the most about in the press. Blue Prism is only RPA. UiPath and Automation Anywhere do both RPA and desktop. So that's another thing. A lot of these providers don't fit into all of those categories we described at the beginning. In fact, most of these providers only fit into one, so another fact that you sort of find for organizations that have been doing RPA for a while is that they don't have a single solution. Lots of organizations use two, because they actually use the right tool for the job. Gosh, that's a shock, but sometimes it happens, and they actually use more than one solution. Organizations like Pega, NICE, big organizations, already. Pega bought OpenSpan a couple of years ago. NICE bought a company called Igloo a few years ago, and they integrated RPA into their offering. And you're sort of hearing lots and lots of partnerships and these things going on at the moment. IBM have partnered with Automation Anywhere. Appian have partnered with Blue Prism. And somebody's partnered with UiPath. Oracle, that's right. So you can sort of see these things are happening already. Those partnerships are coming in. Targeted solutions. You may not have heard of some of these companies because they are slightly more niche. SPS is Swiss Post. It's grown out of the post rooms. So if you've got an existing post room solution with lots of scanning and OCR and pieces like that, that might be something that actually sort of is more sort of key to you. AutoLogix is a compliance organization. They've grown out of governments and HR departments, really, really strong HR type solutions. IPsoft is actually more of a virtual assistant. Again, one of those sort of categories to sort of think about, but very advanced virtual assistant in terms of what it's capable of. And then you've got the rest, lots of organizations that actually, they're all good organizations. So no criticisms here at all. And they may be the right ones for you. But they've sort of grown up out of sort of the RPA or desktop automation area. Softomotive, for example, is really, really strong as a business development tool. So if you've got a really weak IT function, Softomotive is a great solution. So it's understanding the differences between these types of tools to fit them with your organization is really, really important. To help you do that, it's a good idea to try and find a partner, because one of the things partners will do is actually sort of help you identify what is the fit for your organisation, and actually sort of help navigate you through to that solution. And what they will do is they will go through these factors. So so all of those solutions we've just sort of looked at, have different cost points. One of them, probably starts as a six-figure starting point. Others is more like pence. So again, what is your sort of starting point in terms of cost? What's the technical fit? Not all of those solutions will fit with every piece of technology. So if you've got, as we did in that first pilot back in 2012, a very, very old version of Visual Basic that's a mission-critical system running on Citrix, not all of those solutions are necessarily going to work with that wonky, bonkers environment that we had. What's the business fit? And that's back to that, IT and technology. If you've got a really strong technology function and you want to grow it out of technology, some of those tools are technology heaven, but they're not going to work very well if you're going to try and put them into the business, and vice versa. So again, you've got to try and sort of work that fit. Orchestration is about, sort of how do you orchestrate work currently? If you're an organisation that's already got a really good sort of BPM type solution that's managing work, you're in a great place. Most organisations aren't, and that's the question. How do you orchestrate work? How do you divide it between humans, and how do you divide it between bots, and how do you control all of that? There are organisations starting to pop onto the market over the last sort of 18 months that only do orchestration, and specifically with that problem in mind. If you've got multiple RPA solutions and people who do really manual stuff, then they will orchestrate it all for you. Because not all of those tools come with an orchestration option. So how do you manage that? How would you manage the work? We've talked about the types of automation, and again, that's, in my mind, one of those really important starting points. Also, training courses, training and resources and availability. One of the technologies on there, Work Fusion, is a really nice solution. But in the UK, there's 5 people who know how it works. If you're going to sort of develop that one, you're going to be on your own. And it's that sort of thing. What are different countries, I would imagine, have different strengths and weaknesses as far as those resources are concerned. So that's going to be something to consider. What's the level of partner and vendor support? Some organisations, and this is, again, it's cost, but that's where the enterprise solutions come in, because they've typically got a lot of partner and vendor support already built in. The smaller organisations won't have. So what degree of vendor support are you going to need, or partner support are you going to need? And how does it fit with your industry? Again, some are really, really strong in some industries, like financial services or finance. So if those are your industries, then they may be a good fit for you. And this last one's a little bit geeky, but actually some of these tools are really, really easy to be able to build in a very modular way. So you build it once and you go, right, fantastic, I can use that here, I can use it here, I can use it here. And that's great, because that reuse is heaven. Some of them really don't work that way, and if you want to use it there, and there, it means you build it 5 times. So again, you've got to start to sort of evaluate these things. So when you're sort of selecting your tool, these would always be the things that when I go in and talk to an organisation, these are all the questions that I'd be asking. The other thing is about skills. I've been seeing lots of job adverts appear that seem to think you can get a developer in one of these RPA tools that does all of this. And if you find him, well done. But the poor guy's going to be so stressed, you're not going to keep him for very long. And that's a real problem. You've got to actually sort of think of it from an organisational perspective. You don't need to bend all these skills into just one person. You need to actually start thinking about what are the skills that you do need in your organisation, and probably have in your organisation. One of the things that you do sort of see is those more mature organisations have often grown their RPA experience out of something like a BPM or business process improvement type function. That's a really nice fit, which is the second sort of column in here. Because those skills work really well. They tend to be more business focused, they tend to be more modeling, they're not quite so technical, but they do understand how these processes work. And that's a really, really important skill. But to grow this in your organization, I can't sort of emphasize enough that actually having somebody who's thick-skinned and can be a little bit maverick, but can also lead from the front at the most senior level is going to be critical. Because without that person, it really is going to be hard work. That process I told you about at the beginning, we eliminated 50% of the time from the process. And 6 months later, the management team decided they were going to take it out. And they cancelled it all. And quite simply, it was because they had the local power to be able to do that. Quite simply, they saw that their teams were getting smaller. Quite simply, they saw their responsibility diminishing. And so they weren't thinking about what is the best for the organization. They were thinking, what's best for my job? And it went. And that is the type of challenge that you will run into as well. That actually, without that buy-in from the top, you're going to run into those types of people and problems. Then, 6 months later, we went back and put it in again. It's like madness. So, well, I wasn't a consultant. I was just working for the company, but and the people on the ground, and that's the thing, the people on the ground who were using it, because it was desktop automation, people on the ground who was using it, when it was taken out, were contacting me going, why have you taken it away? It's my fault, And it was like, they really, really wanted it. It had made their life easier. They had got used to it. They'd really got used to that. But there's a saying, turkeys voting for Christmas. That was the problem at the management level. The support was awful. You do have the technical piece, and when you come to development, again, depending on the type of tool set you select, will depend upon the type of technical level that you will need. As an ex-techie, UiPath is a much more technical product. And like I said, Softomotive is a much more business-focused product, which is the right one. And the others fit on that scale. Making sure it fits with your existing architecture, that's basic, but really, really important. No point introducing automation to automate your existing systems if it won't talk to them. And then finally, this sort of operations piece. Okay, so where? Oh, yes. There was a poll recently, about 6-8 months ago, and the question was, where did you start? And at that time, over 50% of organizations said, we started in finance. And you can understand why. Finance has a lot of boring, mundane, repetitive types of processes. Whether it's billing, it's journaling. And they actually, they are quite fortunate because they get a lot of this data electronically. So literally you are treating humans like computers. They're giving them getting electronically, printing it out to give them to key in somewhere else. So perfect types of jobs for automation. So you can understand. That does come with a health warning in my mind. The reason that over 50% of organizations that started RPA started in finance is because largely the organizations that used RPA first were banks and financial services organizations. So you sort of, okay, it sort of goes hand in hand. And so now, it would be good almost to take a snapshot of just the last 12 months, if you could do that. Unfortunately, I can't, but I keep trying. If I could take a snapshot of the last 12 months and see where organizations started, and I don't think it would be finance. I think it would be more likely to be back office functions. But if you're not sure, follow the crowd. The second thing to think about is when you're selecting a process is time and volume. They're your friends, really, because most organizations know which are the highest volume processes and which are the ones that take the longest. So you sort of multiply those two things together to get the total amount of time each process takes each year, or week or month. And then you can sort of simply rank it, and you can sort of see there are going to be your biggest opportunities. So actually, you don't have to engage in massive assessments and analysis to try and start running your initial experiments. We talked to an organisation, and if as a small consultancy, which I work for, as a small consultancy, if I could do this, I would, but you just can't. But we were talking to an organisation about how to get started, and they goes, "Oh yes, yeah. Well, we've hired Deloitte. They're doing a 16-week assessment to decide where we should start." 16 weeks. Give us 16 hours. You don't need 16 weeks to decide where to start. You can, apply some very, very simple insider knowledge, because you're all going to have that insider knowledge to work out which are your highest time and volume. And once you've got your top 10 list, the next step is to sort of drill down a little bit, and then you can start thinking about a few other things, And then you might not go for number 1, you might go for number 5, but actually, you can then start to go, okay, which is the one that's going to give us the sort of the most impact on the ground in terms of people, is it really rules based? Is it really very task focused, or is it there's a lot of judgment in here? If there's a lot of judgment in there, it probably is something to avoid at the beginning. To be honest, you will come back to it, because that is where the sort of machine learning and the cognitive stuff is starting to make amazing inroads. But you don't need to start there. Quality, there is a cost within an organisation called failure demand, and failure demand is the amount of effort that goes into fixing things that go wrong. And some organisations have a high degree of failure demand. So it might not be the highest process in terms of volume or time, but it has a really high failure demand, and therefore something that's really worth considering. The other thing actually starts to sort of get into more of your long-term thinking, which is, is it something I can use elsewhere? There are many tools out there that make it very easy to make things reusable. So if you've got processes that are similar in different areas, that you can reuse some of that code, that's really, really good. They get the sort of, I'm not sure what to call them. Some people don't like using the term code, and I don't blame them, because it isn't very code-like. It is more like models. But I'm an old developer, so I keep using the term. The last one is, sort of low. Oh, sorry, no, second to last one. Next one is low to no touch. That's something you can just sort of do hands off. So if you're thinking about actually, can we eventually push this out into pure RPA rather than at the desktop? That's a really important consideration. And then the last one is definitely more of a long-term consideration, which is these tools are not just about doing what you do today. And don't get me wrong, because actually that's a really good place to start. So automate some of the stuff you do today. But it's opening new doors to new opportunities. It's opening new things that you can do for your customer that you might not have been able to do before. And a good example of this might be that you've got some old legacy systems that you can't connect to your website. You can put a robot in to actually act as the middleman. And that robot will run 24/7. So you get a query into the website, the robot will run it off your legacy systems, provide the response back to the website. It's as if it had an API, but because those systems don't necessarily have APIs, your robot is running in the middle, and it's opening new opportunities to your customers. So actually, we're sort of finding a lot going on there, particularly as customers demand more 24/7. So when? Now. Do it now. This is a chap from Gartner, and I'll come back to sort of our first pilot and our biggest failure. The biggest threat to innovation is internal politics and an organisational culture which doesn't accept failure and/or doesn't accept ideas from the outside and/or cannot change. Yes, that was the organisation I worked for. That's pretty much sums it up. And we were set up actually. We were set up as a team to address that very problem. At least the company at the board level was self-aware and said we have to do something about it. But actually, many organizations suffer with this. It is about culture. What is the reaction going to be? The press is sort of against you. At least back in 2012, nobody had a clue what robotic process automation was. In fact, I don't think the term really sort of materialized until a few years ago. So it really was sort of pushing water uphill back then because nobody knew. Now it's pushing water uphill because everybody knows for all the wrong reasons. So it's sort of different challenges. This one's me. This is the quote. I think it's better that you start somewhere than not start at all. Start those experiments. Start to learn. See if there's an opportunity there. You really can't go wrong. And you can start really cheaply. There's a lot of those tools I mentioned in all of those quadrants actually start with a free version. So, so you are not actually sort of having to sort of fork out large sums of money, which is sort of what was happening about 12 months ago. All the major organizations decided that POCs was a great money maker and was charging like sort of £35,000 just to run a pilot. They realized that was a really bad idea, thank God, and have sort of gone back the other way. But that was certainly a challenge. So if you've looked at this before and gone, it's really hard to get going, it's sort of got easier again. The last topic I've got is one size never fits all, and you don't always have to go for the 24 ounce. You can sort of start over here. Part of my background is organisational design, and so there are different organisational designs that you can start thinking about that are suitable or not suitable for RPA. So these are your three sort of typical sort of organisations. You've got a centralised organisation. At the other end, you've got what's called a federated organisation, and then you've sort of got a hybrid model. So I'll start with federated. Lots of organisations that start with RPA start over there. And the reason is really simple, is because most of the RPA vendors market not to IT, they market to the business direct. They all tell you, and some of them are lying, they all tell you this is for business people, and you just need to do it without IT. Don't worry about IT. And so actually that's where a lot of organisations start. It's not a bad place to start because you can get some real benefit. so actually there's quite a few that begin there. There are some at the other end of the spectrum over here in centralised that grow out of IT. And actually, IT see it as the next step forward, and they start to actually treat RPA as if it was one of their traditional tools. It murders RPA to do that. So suddenly you get all this governance and process and waterfall methodology, and go, we'll implement a robot in 3 years, and suddenly you're killed by it. So you can find that rarely does a fully centralized approach really work. But actually both of those methodologies have some merit. Because you want to be able to have that focus in terms of being reactive, a light but strong governance, and you want to be able to deliver things rapidly. Equally, you want to be able to run 24/7, and you want to have an appropriate level of IT and business link, because you are typically sitting on top of existing IT systems. So changes to those underlying systems will often impact your automation. Now, the good news is, most of those tools can cope with changes to the underlying sort of systems quite well. It's not like the bad old days of pulling bits off a screen to understand what's going on. It works at a completely different level. And so actually, fields can move around. It doesn't depend on those, and your automation will still work. But some pieces of software don't work like that. And so when you have those types of underlying systems, then actually, as soon as your underlying system change, you literally do have to spend a lot of time to put your automation back together. So again, it does depend on your underlying systems, to the level of sort of flexibility. So you've got to understand your existing landscape. You need your IT guys. So it won't come as any surprise to sort of say that my favorite approach is that collaboration between the two. You want the flexibility, you want that center of excellence, you want to be able to have both IT and the business working in harmony to drive results. But I did start this sort of section with the statement, one size never fits all. And this is really true. I can name organizations that have scaled using all three of these different approaches. So, I like the hybrid model, but that's not necessarily the only one, and it's not necessarily the one that's right for you. You should actually sort of consider which is the right one for you. There's a really big organization that uses a federated model really effectively, and and they've done it brilliantly. So there are these case studies out there that you can see, and I'll share some of them. But actually, you've got to find the right fit for you. Don't go blindly into believing, as almost every one of the vendors will tell you, you've got to have a center of excellence. Yes, likely it's probably a good idea, but work it out for yourself. Don't just jump in blindly thinking it's the right idea. I guess for takeaways, we've talked about leadership, skills, and culture. They're the three things. There's nothing to do with the technology. It has everything to do with your organisation, and they are critical. Get started. That's it. Just do it. Be Nike. Just do it. Have a game plan though. Game plan isn't a detailed roadmap, it's a where am I trying to get to, so you can just line people up behind it and go, we're heading over there. But, so long as we're all going roughly that direction, that's good. And most important of all, choose a vendor or a solution and an operating model that is right for your organization. And by that I mean, consider those factors we talked about earlier to figure out which is the right fit for you. I think that's it, isn't it? Yes. So, thank you. Question, oh yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. No, absolutely. I think, when we talk about desktop and we talk about robotic automation and we talk about virtual assistants, all of those three technologies work for any scale of organization. When you get to the cognitive end, you need a lot of data, and that is definitely favoring the big organizations because they have the volume of data that supports that. But for the other three, a lot of those solutions are very scalable. They literally, they literally charge on a pay-as-you-go model, which means you can start really small and build up slowly. And I will come back to, the people who get involved, in these activities, they love it. You communicate it the right way. It does take away the mundane tasks, and like I say, they were ringing me or going, I want it back, and it was the sort of organisational cultural challenge, not the fact that we couldn't do it. So the first thing actually is a bit of a mentality change in terms of that switching products, because there isn't a lot of compatibility between them. But it doesn't matter. These things you can develop in them so quickly. It's not like you've invested 10 years of development time. You've typically invested, sort of 2 to 5 weeks in this, and then you've gone, okay. So it's that ability to sort of, we talk about fast fail. It's more about doing it inexpensively and actually finding the right solution for you. So, and it's the same, it's the same whether you're talking about automation tools or you're talking about low code and a lot of the new technologies. You've got to try and get people out of this mindset that we'll only invest in technology if we're going to use it for the next 500 years. It's a real mindset shift, which comes back to the culture. In terms of choosing, that's what I was trying to do on that slide with the list, and I know Otto's going to share the slides, but it's if you look at those, imagine that list of sort of 8 or 9 things that was on there. It's like a set of sliders that I use, and when you go in and look at an organisation, you sort of evaluate against those criteria, and typically, when you've talked to them, 2 or 3 solutions pop out the other side as being a good fit. And that's why I talk about that's where that is definitely where a partnership helps, because if you can find a partner that you can work with just for a short space of time, just to get you going, they can usually accelerate that piece because they know how those sliders sort of fit together. So that is the sort of the key there. You can do it yourself, and there's certainly all the information you would need is actually in public domain. It's not hidden away. It just takes a bit of sort of legwork to get to it. I mean, some organisations, we talked about the federated approach. Some organisations got themselves forced into doing that because IT didn't want to engage. They were in a sort of position that they said, RPA is not a strategic solution; it's a business tool. We want to provide the strategic solution, therefore we're not getting involved. And in my opinion, RPA is both a strategic and a tactical solution. You can use it for both. And actually, I would say that way of thinking is changing, now. But it really did hold back RPA in a lot of places because it was almost considered like a toy. It wasn't the real solution. At least now it's being considered more as an appropriate solution for both the strategic problems and the tactical problems. Yes, I mean that's true. I mean, I think again it's back to the leadership at the top question. I mean, to be honest, the thing about RPA and modern technology is the cost of technical debt is getting less, funnily enough. So ossifying is probably right. Ossifying those old solutions may not be a bad thing, but so you've got to make the strategic decision that is the right way to go. There's a concept called the digital twin, which is like a 5-year plan to get off all of your legacy systems, where you literally you start on all your legacy systems and you start replacing it over a 5-year period, and then at the end of the 5 years, all your legacy is gone, and you run a digital twin within your organisation. Nobody's got through the 5-year plan yet, but the principle of it is the opposite of that. It's saying we are definitely going to, at the end of the 5 years, not have the legacy systems. Yeah. So dealing with things like pop-ups is usually really easy to deal with. Most of the tools have what are called triggers, so they look for certain circumstances and they can deal with that. So they can pretty much deal with anything in the typical Windows environment we'll throw at it. They can handle. Freeform text it's exactly the same question that you sort of get, which is what is the person at the end of what is the person doing? Is the person just, is it a structured format that they're following? They're just looking for certain keywords. In which case, you can program an automation to do exactly the same thing that a person is doing. If it's lots and lots of text, like an email, and being able to get context and understanding out of an email, you are definitely over on the right-hand side of that chart into the sort of machine learning element. So you can do that. But that is going to take more time and money compared to the more rote tasks, and so I wouldn't necessarily start with that type of problem. But some organisations do. Again, it's whatever's right for the organisation. I think startups. We've funny enough in the UK we do a lot of work with Startup Bootcamp, and I see they're sort of as we came in. Startups are interesting. They largely fall into two camps. So startups quite often start with a point of view being very collaborative to begin with, working with each other, and they start with the perspective that it's a technology solution, and they will only add ahead when they can't do it via the technology. So so it's almost ingrained in the whole way they operate. So they don't have this problem. It's simply in their DNA in terms of their operation. Oddly enough, you find the non-IT savvy sort of startups, which also exist out there. They're somewhat fewer between, and they almost, in Startup Bootcamp terms, we've actually sort of looked at, could you provide CTO as a service to those startups, because they're sort of missing out on many of those types of opportunity. So the leapfrog question. I think those types of startups have exactly the same problem that any organisation, whether they've been operating for years or not, have, which is they need to start learning this and start putting it in place. But for those where it's in their DNA, it's in their DNA. It's just they wouldn't, you know, yeah. Many vendors can, yes. So you know, a lot of vendors have worked very hard at being able to work multiple environments, multiple virtual environments, you know, many legacy environments, and they use different techniques to be able to sort of achieve that. If that's your operating environment, which was the operating environment we had back in 2012. You know, we had VB-based stuff, we had virtual stuff, we had browser-based modern applications. I mean, we had just you know, complete mix of everything. So you know, our evaluation was very, very deliberate to find the vendor that could cope with our environment, and they do exist. They definitely do exist. Yeah.
Okay. Let's mingle. Let's network. And if you have particular questions,
thank you. No, thank you for listening.